Hello, I'm Dr. Paul Bowles. I'm with the Washington State University team working in collaboration with the Extension Collaborative on Immunization, Teaching, and Engagement, or EXCITE. This is one of 3 video modules that have been produced on applied neuromarketing science as part of the Getting to the Heart and Mind of the Matter Toolkit. There are many other modules for you to use to help you learn from the toolkit. You can watch any of our other videos about motivational interviewing, science media literacy, or this module on applied neuromarketing science. You can click on any link to each of the modules in the description available. Let's get started. Welcome to this video, Neuromarketing Part 2, Applied Neuromarketing, Understanding the Human Brain. Before I get started with the content on this module, I'd like to thank my co-author on the Neuromarketing Toolkit, Dee Moo. She's a doctoral candidate and research associate in the Murrow Media Mind Lab in the Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University. There are 3 objectives for this video module as related to applied neuromarketing science. Objective number 1, gain an understanding of the human brain and the mind. That last part is important to keep in mind because applied neuromarketing science equates the human brain with the human mind. We'll talk a little bit more about that in this video. Objective number 2, understand brain truths about how the mind works. This is basic foundational knowledge about human brain structure and function that you really need to know if you're going to valuably apply neuromarketing science. And finally, objective number 3, understand basic practical implications of brain truths for brain-friendly communication content. This is the objective met by thinking through how professional communicators like yourself can, in very real terms, apply neuromarketing science to effective communication content. Let's dig in. Understanding the human brain, brain truths for brain-friendly communication content. This is so important, this idea of brain truths. The reason that's important is because brain truths can be used to help guide creative choices concerning communication content. That's why it very practically matters to communication professionals like yourself. The practical value of these brain truths comes from the very fact that they are foundational, fundamental truths about the nature and functioning of the human brain. And it's that knowledge that can really empower communication professionals like yourselves to produce highly effective, brain-friendly communication content. So, I just made the point about the practical value of brain truths coming from fundamental truths about the human brain in general. I'm talking about a level of brain structure and function that applies regardless of whose head that brain is in. There are basic foundational properties and functions of the human brain. So, of course, this begs the question, what about neurodiversity? Aren't human brains individually different? Of course they are. But the whole focus of brain truths, that idea of brain truth in producing brain-friendly communication, is that there are indeed basic foundational properties and functions of a human brain that remain intact, barring severe issues and situations. But these brain truths remain intact and influence how a human mind is going to process your communication. I want to make sure I emphasize that I am not at all saying that individual differences don't matter, because they do. And we'll talk a bit more about that in one of the specific brain truths that I present to you. Before we get into the details of the specific brain truths I'm going to cover in this video, I want to just set those up a little bit by making some general points about the human brain. First and foremost, I want to say that to apply these brain truths effectively to communication, content, development, design, and delivery, you don't have to be a neuroscientist or an expert in brain science. You just have to understand some foundational knowledge about how the human brain is structured and functions. And I will tell you this, the reason applied neuromarketing science is getting a whole lot of attention and is taking modern marketing by storm is because a lot of professional communicators have woken up and realized that communication efforts can often fail through ignorance of how the human mind processes and responds to communication content. Communication professionals that design, develop, deliver content without thinking through how the human brain actually works are basically treating that brain and mind like a mysterious black box that can't be penetrated. You shove some content in there and you hope, cross your fingers and hope, that content somehow achieves the desired response in the target audience. There's a better way to think about things, folks, and that's why applied neuromarketing science has a lot of unique value and is getting a lot of attention. And as you can hopefully understand from the figure on the right, I'm not going to go into detail of all the stuff in that figure. That's a pretty complicated figure. But as you look at that figure, you ought to come away with the idea that there's a whole lot of work that the human mind is doing when it's processing communication content. This is a diagram from a book that I had the pleasure of co-authoring on neuromarketing as a methodology. And we intended this diagram to depict all the general stuff that a mind does in processing communication content. You can see there's a lot. And the big point to take away right now from this diagram is that most of the work that the human mind does in processing communication content is done at the unconscious or automatic level. And consciousness just shapes form kind of at the tip of outcomes of communication content. All the stuff that's in the diagram in the black and darker gray area, those are all mostly unconscious processes related to attention and memory and emotional and motivation responses that occur less consciously as individuals perceive, interact with, and decide how they're going to respond to your content. Now, that doesn't mean that consciousness doesn't play a role. In fact, obviously it does, as you can see in this diagram. Conscious phenomenological experience, existing attitudes and perceptions, all of that influences ultimately behavioral response. And so it is so important to consider conscious and unconscious processes in understanding how the human brain works and the implications of that for the effective design of communication content. Let's dive into the brain truths now. I'm going to have 3 brain truths that I present to you. Just our general truths about how the brain works. And after I introduce a brain truth, I'll talk through some very general, high-level, specific implications of that brain truth for the development, design, and delivery of effective communication content. I'm going to be talking about this at a general high level in this video, because in another video, we'll talk very, very specifically about how to think through the human brain when it comes to the effective and powerful design of health communication content. Right now, let's just get these brain truths out there and into your brain. Brain truth number 1, the brain is a limited capacity processor. Some of you might be running into this right now. There's a lot of information, and there's a lot of information I'm yet to cover. What this brain truth means is, just to put it very bluntly and simply, we can't process all the information that gets tossed at us. That's really a no-duh point, obviously. But it is so important to remember when you're thinking about the brains of your target audience and how they're going to interact with and process your communication content. The overall amounts, as well as the number of distinct bits of information and communication content, can so easily overload cognitive capacity of the target audience, and that causes memory for the content to actually suffer. They're not going to be able to walk away fully grasping, understanding, and knowing and remembering the core messages you're wanting to communicate in your content. So you have to be careful about the brain being a limited capacity processor. The very practical high-level implications of this brain truth is that as communication professionals, when you're in the stage of developing content, which is that early stage, brainstorming through what are going to be the messages in the content, you need to develop content that highlights one central message. Get that? One central message with a maximum of 2 or 3 supporting messages communicated in a clear, uncluttered manner. Designing content. You need to design the content to be delivered in a concise manner with as few bits of distinct information as possible. I want to cover that idea of distinct information a little bit more right now. Distinct information means any sensory element that's in the communication content, from photos to headlines to graphics to sound to music to cuts and edits in video. Everything that goes into production introduces a bit of information that a human brain is potentially going to have to process. And it's critical that if you're going to remember that the brain is a limited capacity processor when you design content, you got to deliver content in concise, distinct, and clear, clean manner in one central message. In terms of delivering, well, it just comes down to you got to deliver content in a way that makes it easy as possible for audience members to cognitively process, meaning pay attention and actually learn the central, most valuable information in the communication content. This comes down to selecting the right platform, trying to get that content delivered within the right context or environment, thinking through how context and environment might impact your target audience's ability to pay attention and learn the key central message in your content, thinking through those things strategically. Brain truth number 2. I told you that individual differences matter, and this is where the rubber meets the road on that point. The brain is a contextual cultural processor. Individual differences matter. The brain takes into account its individual differences in interacting with communication, that all communication occurs in a context, and culture matters. Cultural cues in the communication content, they can practically serve to increase or decrease the motivational relevance of the content and the context in which content is delivered. And all of that will crucially determine attention and memory for the content. Let's dive into some practical implications for this brain truth. The brain is a contextual cultural processor. Practical implications when it comes down to developing content is it means that communication professionals like yourself need to focus on developing content that is informed by expert understanding of the cultural background, emotional triggers, values, and pre-existing attitudes of your intended audience. This is a no-duh point for most communication professionals. Know your audience. Understand your audience, because culture and context matters in terms of your ability to achieve the desired effects of communication content. When it comes to designing content, content with sensory elements, in other words, all the visuals, words, colors, that resonate with the cultural background of the intended audience, and in a form or layout that focus attention on relevant cues, cultural cues specifically, is so crucial to the effective design of communication content. When you're at the stage of making production strategy and tactical choices, you've got to think through, including the words and the sensory elements, all the sensory elements that deeply resonate with the cultural background of your audience and are going to work very effectively in the context of content exposure. Delivering content. The practical implication is that when you're delivering content, remembering this brain truth, the brain is a contextual cultural processor, you need to focus on delivering that content over channels and technology platforms that are culturally relevant to the intended audience and are as uncluttered as possible. What this just at a bare, simple level means is that when you're thinking through what platform or what channel or what contextual experience are we going to deliver this content in? You need to think about your audience and understand your audience and understand the context and the specific media platforms that are culturally relevant to them, that have motivational significance, that they're going to effectively engage with. Brain truth number 3, the brain is a motivated emotional processor. Boy, when we get to talking more specifically about how to apply these brain truths, specifically in the design of health communication content, we're going to camp on this a bit because all health communication is highly emotional. But let's talk more generally here. The brain is a motivated emotional processor means that raw motivations related to approach and avoid motivational, just basic, appetitive, and aversive, positive, negative, pleasant, unpleasant, those raw gut level emotional motivational processes are going to fundamentally determine how individuals will process and respond to communication content. These emotional processes determine how the brain is going to process and respond to communication content within milliseconds of exposure to the content. The brain's first and foremost mission is to keep us alive. And that means in milliseconds, it's got to immediately determine, is this going to be an experience where I approach the stimulus or the content, or I defensively flee and avoid the content? And even if a person isn't literally approaching or fleeing your content, their brain is. And that's important to remember. And that response occurs in milliseconds on brain time. The brain makes that determination very quickly, and it shapes the entire communication experience moving forward through time. Brain-friendly communication content that is intended to educate community members must resonate with them at this emotional, motivational level. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk specifically about health communication. So here are the practical implications for this truth. The brain is a motivated emotional processor. When it comes to developing content, communication professionals like yourselves need to develop content that strategically, purposefully, in a planned manner, includes sensory elements that explicitly connect with current emotional triggers around the topic or core message of the content that the intended audience feels towards the subject of that content. Think about the subject, the core message of your content, and put in cues that emotionally fire your target audience up at an appropriate level. And we'll talk more about that when we talk specifically about health communication in another video. Designing content means you got to think through designing content that strikes the best mixture of positive and negative emotional tone based on the emotional context surrounding the topic. Think through how the topic emotionally resonates and is likely to make your target audience emotionally respond, and then design content that effectively utilizes potentially both positive and negative emotional tone. The latest research on persuasion indicates that only positive or only negative messages typically may not succeed as well as a mixture of positive and negative emotional tone. This is particularly true for health communication. When it comes to delivering content, you need to think through delivering content over channels and technology platforms that evoke a positive user experience. This is where you want dominantly a positive experience, is with the context and channel that the individual is actually interacting with. And you got to use sources or spokespeople that have strong positive emotional affiliations with the intended audience. When I talked about effective persuasive content being a mixture of positive and negative emotional tone, that's independent of spokesperson considerations and channel or technology platform considerations. When it comes to spokespeople and technology, you want those elements having a strongly positive connection with your target audience so that the effective emotional tone of the content can break through and resonate deeply in a brain-friendly manner with your target audience. Those are the brain truths. And you've already completed, congratulations, by the way, Dr. Paul Bowles' Brain Science 101 class. That's it. If you know just kind of that basic stuff about the human brain, you should practically be equipped to produce some brain-friendly content, or at least do that to a higher degree than you may have been able to do before you viewed this video. These brain truths fundamentally guide applied neuromarketing science. They really help think through how to apply neuromarketing science in the most practically and scientifically valid way. And ultimately, the goal here is brain-friendly communication content that resonates and works effectively with the nature of the human brain. As part of our project for Excite, we actually conducted applied neuromarketing science, and a video on that case study is included in this series on neuromarketing as supplemental material or an appendix video to the 3 videos that I host. The applied neuromarketing science case study, if you view that video, which I strongly encourage you to do, you'll see how some of these brain truths emerge from the application of neuromarketing science to actual, real, in the field content testing. That video is fantastically hosted by Dimu, who I introduced and thanked earlier in this video. And I hope you'll take the time to view that video. Thank you for watching and learning with me today. I'd like to thank the Excite Foundation through its interagency agreement with the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for funding this project. I hope this toolkit really provides great value and usefulness for you and your stakeholders, and you learn and think through how to develop effective brain-friendly communication. I'm Dr. Paul Bowles. Thank you for your attention today.